So I'm Martin Riker. I am a professor in the English department here at WashU, and I am the director of the department's new publishing concentration. So with the comment Michelle made in the last panel about opportunities to be, we actually last year, we started a concentration in the English major to study publishing as part of the major, so that's there. I also wear a few other hats. I'm a novelist and a book critic, and with Professor Danielle Dutton, I co-run the feminist publishing house Dorothy Publishing Project. Prior to all of those jobs, I served for about 10 years as the associate director of Dalkey Archive Press, a nonprofit publisher some of you probably know, specializes in modern and postmodern world literature, where I had the honor of reissuing a number of books by William Gass and the pleasure of knowing him a little bit. My role today is to introduce and ask some questions of Bradford Morrow. He is the author of 12 books, winner of countless awards, founder and editor of the revered literary magazine Conjunctions, and a longtime friend and colleague of Bill Gass. We're very fortunate to have Brad here to celebrate the Gass Centennial and to talk about their friendship and the personal side of Bill's relationship to the literary culture. So I have a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll just start asking questions. Gass was a writer who saw great success throughout his career and achieved many of the signs of prestige our literary establishment offers. But he was also a writer of strong convictions and a vocal critic of the market-driven superficiality of the culture. In print, he lambasted the commercial mediocrity of the Pulitzer Prize. He compared novel plot to bird drop and horse plop. And he forcefully and at every turn defended the value of art against conventional thinking and the ideology of the market. It is not at all surprising that he would have respected and valued conjunctions and come to be friends with our speaker here, Bradford Morrow. Bradford Morrow's decision in the 1980s, the early 1980s, to launch a literary magazine was a historically important event. For from the very first issue, Conjunctions was a space where writers who worked outside of conventional and market-driven expectations could focus on their art. William Gass and many other innovative writers, among them WashU faculty Mary Jo Bang, Marshall Klemaszewski, Catherine Davis, Danielle Dutton, and myself. Conjunctions did not simply publish this work, it provided a context, a place where non-commercial writers of many types and traditions could be part of a community of sort, which is finally what a great publisher provides, a community, a context. I've always thought that this is why Conjunctions #1, which I happen to have a copy of my own, big collector's item. It's really beautiful. It's on this watercolor paper. Was a fresh shrift to James Laughlin and New Directions Publishing, because that was a worthy subject and because it announced Bradford Morrow's own aesthetic interests, but also because New Directions, as much as any publisher of its time, had done what Conjunctions was setting out to do. It had created a space in the culture for literature written with indifference to commercial values, a space that was not in the margins of corporate publishing environment, but rather was large enough and beloved enough that it could hold its own, providing a real community for writers and a real audience for readers. In Bill's work, Brad found one of the essential voices in that community that he was building. It's not surprising to me that the two became friends in all the ways that writers do. So for the format for this event, I want to ask Brad some questions, and then we'll open it up to anyone who wants to ask questions of Brad about Bill or about Brad's own work as a novelist or as an editor. Or if you want to just share your own reminiscence of Bill in the context that we're talking about. First, however, we talked about it, and Brad's going to start by sharing an introduction that he wrote for a couple of readings Bill gave at Bard.
Well, thank you for having me. Is this on? Get a little closer? Is that better? No? Can you somehow crank it up? Is that better? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, great. Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes on here. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me out here. You know, Joel and Mary and Catherine, and to be in St. Louis is just a real privilege. Writer's territory indeed, this town. Just talking with Mary, oh, I forgot, yeah, Burroughs too. I mean, everybody, there's so many people. It's in the water. But I'm just looking at this literally just now, and my note on here is my intro for Gass's reading at Bard, October 2nd, 2006. So right around now. Many years ago. I think Bill came to Bard. I had Bill come to Bard, I think 3 times. I'm pretty sure. And Mary came. You came once with us. Anyway, and at every occasion, the students just ate him alive. They loved William Gass. And I had a reading series that included everybody from the aforementioned Dave Wallace to Barth came. I made them read. A Saltweed Factor, and they read the whole book. I made them promise. The tunnel hadn't been out yet, or I would have forced them through that too. But I really, the responses I got to all the various writers who would come and visit, there was nothing quite like when Bill visited. I think they really knew that they had touched language itself in some essential kind of way. But I introduced Bill on that October 2nd, 2006, just welcome Bill to Bard, and then I read, to hear him read is to use a phrase not usually applicable to writers reading their work, an event, a musical event, for Gass is clearly one of our greatest living stylists and knows how to make verbs soar and nouns spring to symphonic life, knows how to work the corners of silences and chime the alliteratives. A philosophical event, the man is, after all, a philosopher. A comedic event, as there's no one funnier, more wildly trenchant and hilarious when he gets on one of his roles. A tragic event, because Gass has never shied away from peering into the deep and crazed dislocations the human spirit suffers. A revolutionary event, because he's made it his life's work to rethink the possibilities of how a sentence can speak, how the form of a short story or novel or essay can be forged anew, and tired little words brought vibrantly back to life. An alchemical event, because as he himself has written, quote, the true alchemists do not change lead into gold, they change the world into words. I love that line. And a literary event, because of all American writers at work today, Bill Gass is one of the very few who would qualify as a true titan of letters. Every genre field he's worked in, novels, novellas, short stories, essays, translations, and even some fields that defy genre, such as his extraordinary prose poem, painting, symphonic word sculpture on Being Blue, has borne books that nourish and sustain us and will go down the generations. In his collection of essays, Finding a Form, he writes, quote, language is not the low-born, gawky servant of thought and feeling. It is need, thought, feeling, and perception itself. The shape of a sentence, the song of its syllables, the rhythm of its movements, the movement of imagination. His is an imagination and voice we are very privileged to honor this afternoon. And so we are this different October many years later. So that's how I introduced Bill. It was a great reading, of course. Those of you who have heard him read, yeah.
Whoa, I'm way louder than you. I thought we could start before we would move eventually over to talking about your work with Bill and conjunctions, but I thought we could start with talking about how you got to know Bill and how your relationship grew.
I have to think it was John Hawkes that connected us. I can't think who else it would have been. In Conjunctions 1, the first prose writer in Conjunctions 1 is Hawkes. We started with Robert Creeley, who became a lifelong friend too, and then Jack Hawkes. And I must have asked Jack, how do I get in touch with William Gass? I really need to write him and tell him that I would love to publish his work, because he's at the center of so much of my thought about how prose works and the music of language and the postmodernist, not an experiment really, it's just the innovations of what Bill was doing. And so that's my guess, is that I couldn't find any letters introducing us, although some of my archives are at Brown University and some at OSU, and they sent me some scans of correspondence and things between me and Bill that ran to almost 1,000 pages. It was like 700 pages. So I went through what I could go through, and we hit it off really, really early. We hit it off, like right away. So he was in Conjunctions too. And he was the first prose writer in conjunctions too. So it was like, in terms of prose fiction, it was a Hawks gas 1-2 punch. It was Uncle Balton, The Nature of Being, was in conjunctions too. And I really didn't know at the time that much about the tunnel. I knew it was always a kind of a mysterious entity. It was coming together. It was not quite done. It was never going to get done. It was, it was like a 10th planet out there that we know about it, but, we can't quite get it in focus in the telescopes and all the rest. And it was just a great mystery. But I was when I published it, I remember when I got the manuscript, that particular typeface of Bill's computer, which is just, nobody has ever used it before or since. I don't think they invented that. It should be renamed Gas, the gas face. I guess that doesn't sound very commercial, but that would have made Bill happy yet again. No, and it came in, and so he and I, we met finally in New York, and the year after that, I think I was 31 and Bill was 58 or 9, somewhere really early 30s, getting on late in his 50s, and again we hit it off. It was a rainy day. I was living on 9th Street in a floor 3 in a brownstone, where I was lucky to have wonderful. David Hockney had a studio on the first floor, believe it or not. Henry Geldzahler, who was the commissioner of New York, had the first 2 floors, and they liked having me in the building because they liked having a literary person. They had all the art they needed, I remember times when there would be paintings by Basquiat drying in the hallways, and he was just unknown yet. So this building was like so Bill came over and he saw my library, and there we hit it off yet again, because we both, our book, I think of him in the present tense, look at that. We both are bibliomaniacs, essentially. And I'm sleeping in a room now at Mary's house. It's Thomas Mann, the German section, then the French section is next door, and then across the hall is American literature. So he saw my apartment, which was floor-to-ceiling bookline as well, and there was yet another brotherly bond. And I interviewed him for Conjunctions 4, which I have here. And I think that afternoon it was really, really, really drizzling in New York. It was a yucky day, and there was a show on Washington Square, at an art gallery on Washington Square on the east, for an illustrated version of On Being Blue. Dieppe was the artist's name? I have it written in here. And from there we went to my favorite place at the time, long gone, but called the Grand Ticino, which is apparently where Dylan Thomas ate his last meal. But who knows? He had his last drink and ate his last meal in many places in New York. And I ran a little, at the time, a cassette recorder, because that's what we did. We had, and I ran it finally. We just ran through every tape I brought, and it just went on and on. Then kind of the fun began as editing it, because I transcribed it. I share that joyful experience of transcribing Gas and slowing the tape down, and that's how we met.
You had mentioned, when we talked before, you'd mentioned that you were bibliomaniacs together.
Yeah.
And that you actually very meaningfully spent time going to bookstores and things like that.
Oh, yes.
And I'm actually sort of curious how you feel that experience is, particularly for writers together.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Well, you're in your cathedral when you're in a bookshop, you're in a place of worship. So like a library or a bookshop, although people like Bill and myself, acquisitives, at least in a library, you're not going to steal anything, but you can read things you can't take home with you. But in a bookshop, all the bets are off unless they ask too much money for it and you have to walk away from it. But no, we had a great time. He and I did a lot of things together, just thinking about these last few weeks. In Paris, we were up in Providence, we were in New York quite a bit, up at Bard. But also there was a reading in Columbus, Ohio, and we read at OSU. Each of us read from whatever fiction we were working on at the time, and then we gave a reading at the Thurber House in downtown Columbus, which was like an added-on event, but Bill and I were kind of the same way. What are we doing? You want to do some more? We'll do more. Okay, that's fine. I'm here with my friend. This will be great. But then they had an extra day, and so now where are the bookstores? And the librarian there, I think he wasn't the same way we were with buying books, but he took us to every bookstore. He went up and down these avenues, and I just remember scouting books with Bill. We'd show each other like, "Have you got this? Have you seen this? Look at this. What's that all about? Do you need this, Brad? No, I've got one." It was just really a lot of fun. I remember him asking me, "Well, so what makes a book rare?" And I said, "If I haven't seen it before." It was the only thing I could come up with at the time, because there's lots of ways you can define a rare book, and if you've spent a lifetime looking at books and you haven't seen it, well, then at least that book for that moment is rare. And Bill and I were interested in dust jacket designs and typography, and we would just, and it was, I've been to bookstores with people who want to elbow you out, and that's just no fun at all. But I find when you go to a bookstore with a writer, you're looking for different things because your projects are different, what you're doing at that moment. So it becomes a kind of a real kind of harmonious investigation of a physical space that has a lot of ideas in it, which is a bookshop.
Columbus, Ohio, it continues to be actually kind of an amazing literary city.
Yeah.
$2 Radio is now located there, which is an indie press that does amazing work and also has a bookstore and also does a book festival. And on the previous panel, the question was raised about the Midwest. And it's always struck me as the person who's not from the Midwest, but who's spent more of his years of his life in the Midwest than elsewhere, that actually, I don't know that the Midwest is more literary than the East Coast, but it's definitely differently literary. And there's a kind of way that I always felt, for instance, working at Dalkey Archive, that it belonged in Illinois because it belonged in a place that had some perspective on the publishing industry, or that had a little bit of space in which you could try things out.
I always loved that you were publishing all this abnormal stuff in Normal.
Yeah.
In Normal, Illinois.
Normal.
Yeah, Normal.
I wanted to ask you, it's really interesting to hear about how you got to know Bill through writing, through editing, and I know that you had a lot of really interesting relationships with all kinds of writers. We were talking before, you knew Creeley, you knew Gaddis, Chinua Achebe, William Burroughs. You had these long lifetime relationships with these people. And I was wondering if you could talk about how your relationship with Bill factors into that sort of constellation.
That's really interesting. Well, just taking that group right there, for instance.
Yeah.
Chinua and Bill shared a kind of deep humanity. There's a kind of whether Bill liked to show it, he didn't show it off necessarily that much. It was his, in his heart, it's his thing. But they were both very deeply thoughtful men, deeply political, each of them too, in their different ways. And courageous men. My gosh, Achebe was a very courageous man in the Biafran War, and actually after he was in the accident and he was in a wheelchair, just to go visit him at Bard and hang out with him. And we did a lot of things around too together. And to watch him in the wheelchair, just negotiate things would make many of us just discouraged beyond belief. Chinua. So they had that. Burroughs was, there was nobody quite like Burroughs, but Burroughs, I think, in Gas, just for instance, shared a edginess and a willingness to explore the sexual, the sensual, extreme moments in human experience. Gaddis, obviously, and Gas were very close friends. I think that when I think about Gaddis and Bill's insistence that the plot is plop, Gaddis was a plotter, you know. I mean, it's interesting. Bill didn't. This was for his own work. Although I was rereading Heart of the Heart, and there's some brilliant plotting in there, and the Peterson Kid and so forth. Sure. I was telling Mary this morning that these books that came out in '66, I think, Heart of the Country, and I was thinking about how close the dialogue in the Peterson Kid is to Cormac McCarthy's dialogue in Outer Dark and Orchard Keeper and Child of God, the early Appalachian ones. Okay. And I was wondering, was McCarthy actually reading Gass? Or I know that Gass was probably not reading Cormac McCarthy, but I wondered about that. And it was interesting. Bill stood out because he kind of combined elements of all these other writers who I had close friendships with. Bill was with Gaddis, it was like, from my friendship with him was very much intellectual and funny. He was like crazy, wonderfully funny, acerbic. So you put Gass and Gaddis together. There was a dinner party once that clearly was Hawks put this together because he was a Francophile. So it was at a French restaurant. And it was after an American Academy gathering. And pretty much all of postmodernism was sitting at this table. It was me, and there was Hawks, and there's Gass, and there's Barth, and there's Coover, and then there's even, just for fun, William Kennedy at the end. And so we're eating this meal and so forth, and Gaddis shows up. Yeah. And he said, cup of tea, gotta have a cup of tea, which was his way of saying he needed a drink. And his wife at the time, didn't want him to be drinking because she didn't want him to be drinking. And so he snuck in a couple of drinks before she showed up, and then he had a cup of tea. And it was very sad, very, very sad moment. Bill knew all about this little shtick. And the friendship among all these guys was, it was collegial. There's no competitiveness in it. There's really, I'm sure there was at some point, but more of my contemporaries seem to be, well, I'm not competitive with people like Richard Powers. We've known each other for a very long time. So there's no competition. And, Dave Wallace, there was no competition there. I was shattered here, but I'm not surprised when he committed suicide. So, you could go to bookshops with those guys and not get in each other's way. I don't know. That's probably not an answer to your question in any way, shape, or form.
But another thing those people all had in common was conjunctions. So maybe that's a good pivot. Before I ask you about conjunctions, I wanted to read Bill Gass wrote the foreword to the 20th anniversary issue of Conjunctions, and I pulled a couple sentences out of it. So this is Bill Gass's words. Conjunctions has maintained a standard of quality that is unmatched while remaining Catholic in its sense of what counts. The reason why the magazine has prospered is that it has had one greatly gifted and energetic editor throughout its lifetime. Brad has built for serious writers a raft where we can thirst and cling and curse like sailors from the shipwreck of our culture. He has taken time away from his own writing to shame all of us who are less generous. That seems erroneous, but the him being less generous part, not the you being generous. And I have never cottoned to he says, I have never cottoned to close games. Personally, I like blowouts best, and Brad has run up a big score. The way I wanted to pose my question about this was, could you talk about the role that Bill played? I mean, obviously you published him, but did he recommend writers to you? What kind of relationship was that?
He played a very big role early on, too, in my kind of, my J. June formative, malleable, whatever years, because I struck out doing this having exactly no idea of what I was doing. No idea at all. I knew I didn't like the journals that I was reading. I liked some of them because the prose seemed good in some, the poetry seemed good in other ones, but ne'er the twain did meet. I could never just find it. And it seemed to me like, well, why don't I just do that for a year or two? Just get out a few issues and stake out another possibility. And then it was 5 years, and then it goes on from there. But Bill, I actually, one of the letters on Washington University St. Louis Stationery, Department of Philosophy, he wrote me in 1984. Yeah, and this is really directly an answer to your question. Dear Brad, the magazine continues to be immensely impressive and is now establishing a major reputation. Apply to the NEA. That's the next paragraph. I will be off for nearly 2 years, beginning May 1st, and I expect pieces of the tunnel to fly forth as I complete the book. 84. You will have first no-no on any chunk. That was, I mean, how blessed was that? I mistakenly gave a bit to Esquire. I think they are going to carve it up before they print it. Possibly they will go too far, and I will be all that dough. I will bid all that dough bye-bye, in which case you will see a section soon, Best Bill. And that's actually, I think, what they did. But I, at the time, knew what an honor it was to be seeing every first chunk of the tunnel and published it. Anything kind of Bill sent my way. I did, the editing I did with Bill, though, I would tease, I mean, occasionally misspelled words and things like that, or doubled words. It was just mechanical stuff. I found it, I've edited a lot of people where I really would get and rewrite stuff. Pretty famous writers, so I get in there and like help them bring it the rest of the way out. Bill didn't send me things that were just, although, again, and I'll stop reading these, but it's just so charming. Bill wrote me this one bit here, February 2003. Dear Brad, I didn't even know what he was sending me. I don't have the, Dear Brad, this may be too arch, too cute, too indirect, too long. If so, just junk it. Bill. How many writers send you a cover letter like that? They're usually just like, oh, I hope you like this, and I spent a lot of time on it. And just, if you don't like it, junk it. But yeah, no, he was, as far as sending people my way, having Bill on the masthead sent people my way just in and of itself. So he came on board on the masthead. So the masthead was Guy Davenport, William H. Gass. I think Walter Abish was on there early on too, and some others. And I think just having Gass and having I published Bill 20 times in 20 issues of Conjunctions. That's a lot. And so I think just having the Gass in your corner, and I think where he went places, he told people about Conjunctions, and if he did actually send some translations my way, to come to think of it. But yeah, no, just having his presence there.
I mean, it definitely establishes a club that a young writer like me wanted to be a member of.
Right.
Although
now at 2,000 writers I've published, it's no longer much of a club.
it's a really big club.
It's a big, yeah.
I do want to open it up for questions and comments. One last thing I'll do before that is I just wanted to give you a chance to share any stories that I didn't ask you about that you think might be sort of interesting.
Well, I've got a lot of stories, but one that I just adore is I was teaching at Princeton one year, teaching at both at Bard and Columbia and Princeton. So I don't know what I thought I was doing, but it was like teaching a three-play. And but I was out of Princeton, and Joyce Carol Oates, my colleague there, had invited Stephen King to come give a reading. And I thought, well, I'm going to get home late tonight, but I got to go hear Stephen King read. This will be interesting to me. And King shows up, and he said, the audience was just wonderful. Princeton kids, Princeton professors, some local audience, and then a bunch of people in motorcycle jackets. And because there was a motorcycle at the time, Stephen King, such a rock star, they would follow him around where he'd give readings, and he doesn't read that often. So from the tri-state and beyond, these motorcycle people showed up with the leather jackets and, like Stephen King, man. So So King got up there, and he's 7 feet tall. We were signing books once in the Viking offices. That was the first time I met him. He was across the way playing music, rock and roll music really loud, and I was trying to concentrate on signing these silly books. Anyway, we were like doing this, and then we introduced him. It was like, I'm not short. And I was like, Stephen. So he's big, and he got up there, and he had a book that I recognized in his hand, and I thought, what is up with that? He said, I've got this book. It's by a writer you may never have heard of. I hadn't heard of him before, but this is genius. So this is going to be a long reading because I'm going to read my own stuff too. And if you get bored, you can just walk out, and I will not be offended because you have other things to do, and I appreciate that. And then he said, okay, so listen to this. He said, and he read, my dad wouldn't let me have a dog. A dog we don't need. My mom made the neighbors spits her pal by poisoning it with the gin she sprinkled on the table scraps. And then he was like, isn't that amazing? He said, this is William H. Gass. I never heard of this guy before. Then he went on. He read the entire fugue. He spent the first half hour of his reading the tunnel, reading from the tunnel. And I think Bill probably sold a few books that day, maybe to the motorcycle gang guys, but it was then literally the very next week or the next day, for all I remember, I flew off to Paris because Bill and I were participating in Marc Chenetier was a French scholar who big on postmodernism. I'm sure you know him. Sure. Anyway, he put together a panel on whatever. It was a conference of some sort with me and Coover was there and Gass and a couple other folks. And I told Bill this story, and he didn't believe me. He said, no. I said, I swear to God, I can get testimony from Joyce. I mean, I promise you it was recorded. And I said, I don't know what else. He eventually believed me, but he couldn't believe it. And then when he got back home, when we both got back home, he wrote me a letter about something else. And he said in the end, he said, well, if we can't meet in New York, when we can't meet in New York, we'll always have Paris. It was his line, was one line. He said, thanks for telling me about the King's Edict. Yeah. So, that's one, but there's just like stacks of them.
It doesn't actually surprise me. When I was working at Dalkey, we always talked about how we felt like the books that we were publishing were books that like intelligent, non-overeducated readers would get better than like Ivy League educated readers, right? Because you're educated into a way of thinking about what literature is supposed to do. And like Sorrentino, for instance, used to always had some line somewhere about how his father, who worked on the docks, was just like much better at reading so-called experimental fiction,
right?
Because he didn't come to it with assumptions about what it was supposed to, the ways it was supposed to perform.
Stephen King's enthusiasm was 1,000% genuine.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess he brought it. He thought, well, this Princeton audience, they're smarties. Yeah. They'll have heard of this guy before. Yeah. I'm not sure the undergraduates necessarily had, but it was a kind of dream come true moment. If there ever is a Gass a movie biodoc, whatever, we should stage that at Princeton. We can probably get Stephen King to come do it himself and get him to read from the tunnel. It was great.
So anyway, I'm sorry I've taken up so much time, but is there any questions or questions for Bradford Morrow about his relationship with Bill, about conjunctions, about his own work, about anything you want to talk about, or things that you might want to share that we haven't brought up? No?
Came from New York. You can ask me now.
Yeah, now's your chance.
Yeah.
Brad, can you point to anything in your own writing that you might be able to kind of trace back to your interactions and discussions with Bill?
Yep, I can.
Would you share that?
No. Yeah, I will. Yeah, Bill Gass, is a dangerous person to read if you're a young writer. I found that to be the case. And because you find, it's like Shakespeare's a dangerous writer to read. Joyce is dangerous. The best are dangerous. Some just don't rub off on you, like Nabokov doesn't never threaten me. I love Nabokov's prose and everything. But I didn't find myself in some way subconsciously writing like Nabokov. Bill, on the other hand, I grew up as a musician. I wanted to be a musician, so I'm a pianist and was a professional musician for a while. And, I know music inside and out. So when I read language, I'm reading music too. And that's something Bill and I very much shared. And that's probably my musical knowledge is what availed Bill's work to me at a deeper level. But so when I was working on my first novel, Come Sunday, there's a tornado in that book that is an homage to gas. I don't know that I've ever said it from an audience before. I think I might have told Bill once. Maybe I didn't. But it was, I thought, one and done here, because it's about 4 pages of this tornado carrying this girl up into the air and so forth. And it has that musicality, it has the alliteratives, it has my sense of what that was all about. But yeah, sometimes writing nonfiction, I had to be very careful about not getting overly alliterative, and because it's hard to do what Bill did. It's very hard to do, and it's not something you can attempt to do it. And I wasn't trying to copy or ape Bill at all. He just had infected me. He was a virus. Like William Burroughs, said language is a virus from outer space. Did you know that he really believed that too? And there's some truth, then maybe not from outer space. Well, though I guess we are from outer space in some sense. But yeah, I think that reading Bill, you have to kind of do something else. Read the newspaper for a while, or read something else, because Bill is so powerful. Shakespeare, iambic pentameter and interior rhymes, and God, when I was reading Dante in the original, I was learning Italian. Man, what a confused dreams I used to have, and my mind was all mixed up because of terzarima and all the rest of that. You know how it is. I have my own style so much for so many decades that it's not a concern. But every so often I'll say, oh, that's a little Bill Gassy right there, and I'll either leave it or I'll take it out, because it can't be too much. Because nobody can do gas, but the man himself. But like jazz musicians, they'll do a little imitation, a little homage to each other. Painters do it, and so forth. So why not writers too? But I think really the larger answer to that question would be the seriousness of the endeavor, and engaging in what you're going to write about is really, really committing. You're being really, really committed, compelled, I think was the word Bill used, being very committed to what you're doing. So I definitely learned that from Bill. And having fun too. It doesn't have to be a beetle-browed disaster every time you sit down at the table. It can loosen up. You can have some fun, and Bill encourages that too. Reading him can be like aerobics. There was an earlier question about submitting to literary journals and getting a start in the literary life and so forth. And I just like my 2 cents worth, since I deal in the middle of this all the time. I'm just now finishing up Conjunctions 83. So much for doing a few issues and getting out. And we get submittable. This new issue is co-edited by me and Joyce Carol Oates, and it's on ghosts. So it's ghost stories from around the world. And we got 1,800 submissions on submittable, and we still do it the old school way with paper submissions, SASEs, things like that. That's like foreign language to some young writers. So it's like, well, there's like 2,500 submissions, we'll say. And I'm always, I have 15 people reading with me. We are always impressed if you know who you're sending your submission to. If you're just spending your $2 or $1 or $3, whatever the journal charges you, and hitting like the send button to every journal you have contact with on Submittable, you're probably going to collect way more rejections for that than you would need to suffer through if you had done your due diligence and research what journal is going to be interested in my work. And by the other token, what journal interests me? You know, where do I actually want to appear? Not just being in print is like, you can be in print, just go steal a bike and you'll be in the local paper. Or, it's easy to get in print, in other words. It's not so hard. But I think it's really important to, and also if you show, like, I really liked that piece by Danielle Dutton in your recent issue. Then I sit up. I said, well, I liked that piece too. Is that, who are you again? That sort of thing. You don't really have to know people. I don't think it's one of those. In fact, people try to get in where they know somebody. Believe it or not, and this is the truth. Oh, this is being recorded. I'm disinclined I'll look at it, and then my disinclination is something I can overrule quite easily if it's just wonderful stuff. But it's hard to be a writer. It's hard to write a bad piece. It's very hard to write a bad piece of fiction or a bad poem. It's just hard work. And then to want to be a writer and send it out there and get your work out into the world, that's beyond hard. It's just that you're exposing your soul, or whatever we got. You're exposing yourself in a way that can be very embarrassing. And you're no longer just showing it to your girlfriend or your husband or, your best pal. You're opening it up to others. And the others generally can be very critical because they are very competitive. So, I think nothing wrong with Submittable. I just think it has to do with, I think cover letters are very important. Mm-hmm. Showing some recognition that it's hard to be a literary journal. Really hard. Oh my God, I have to go out and find a new publisher now. Bard College is, letting conjunctions go this spring. And for whatever reasons, they wanted to let us go a few years ago, and then there was such a public outcry that they gave us another 3 years, bless them. And not every liberal arts college can say we published a journal for 33 years. Mm-hmm. Because we're not a commercially successful enterprise at all, never would be. But it's like doing a literary journal is like a very hard hike, which Bill would know the answer to this. But the French philosopher said, walking is just a series of recovered falls. Gass would know that right away. He said, oh, that's. Mm-hmm. I can't remember right now, but being a writer, but also being a literary journal editor or publishing, it's a series of recovered falls because, and neither path is easy, but we just do it because we're obsessed, we're compelled, we need to, we have to. The blank piece of paper that Bill, we talked about earlier.
I think your advice regarding submissions speaks to what I had to say about conjunctions in my little introduction, which is precisely that conjunctions created this sort of space in the culture. And I think probably what you've been drawn to is people who, for legitimate reasons, want to be a part of that space, who want to be part of that community. And I think that it is easy for people who haven't been on the publisher side of things to not understand how much that sense of community means to the people on this side of things, on the publishing side. Yeah. Anyway, I think, is there any other questions? Or? Oh, okay, we have one more, okay.
The question is, I'd love to know about the history of those Morrow, who she was working on at the end of his life. Can we talk about the Morrow? That was
I mean, I think that's probably a question for someone in this room. Does anybody know about this, the project? Can I share the mic? This is Mary. Yeah.
Some of that has been partially published in journals, one online journal and one print, and it's yet to be published, but it is complete. It's complete.
It's a conference paper on the manuscript that Mary shared with me.
I did a conference paper on that manuscript Mary generously shared with me. So if you go to tedmorsey.blog, you can find at least a description of the manuscript and kind of what it contains and so forth. So it's not published, but I did try to provide some understanding of what he was up to. And of course, it was wonderful. So thank you yet again, Mary, for sharing that manuscript with me.
Any other questions? All right, I think we should probably wrap up. Brad, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.